6:48 in the morning. The Taiwan Strait. A Chinese J-20 stealth fighter banked through a heavy layer of morning mist. Captain Lin felt the steady pressure of the flight suit against his legs as he leveled the aircraft at 24,000 feet. This was a routine combat air patrol. It was his third mission in 4 days. It should have been identical to every other flight over these gray waters. The morning sun was a pale disk behind the clouds. It cast a dull light over the cockpit instruments. Then, the primary tactical display flickered. A line of plain white text scrolled across the green glass of the mission computer. It did not look like a standard system notification. It looked like a typed message. The message was brief. It contained a set of precise geographic coordinates and a timestamp, 7:12 in the morning. The text ended with a single word, collision. Captain Lin checked his surroundings. His wingman was 3 miles to his left. The air was empty for 50 nautical miles in every direction. His radar was active and searching. The screen showed nothing but the vast, empty expanse of the strait. The signal was not coming from the ground station in Fujian. It was not coming from the airborne early warning aircraft circling far to the west. The encryption headers were missing. The data seemed to originate from within his own secure mission computer. It was an impossible intrusion. Captain Lin keyed his radio. Command. This is LED. I am receiving an unauthorized data burst on my primary display. Confirm source. The response from the ground controller was immediate. LED. Command. We show your systems are nominal. No external data bursts detected. Your data link is clear. Describe the intrusion. Lin looked at the screen again. The coordinates were shifting. They were updating in real time. They were moving toward a point 30 miles ahead of his current position. The timestamp remained fixed. 7:12 in the morning. He checked his clock. It was 6:52. The intrusion is a text warning, Lin said. His voice was flat and professional. It is predicting a collision at 7:12. It has provided coordinates. Lead. There are no targets at those coordinates, the controller responded. The airspace is clear. Continue your mission profile. 40 miles to the east, a United States Air Force RC-135 Rivet joint flew a steady track. The large reconnaissance aircraft moved with a heavy, stable grace. Inside the windowless cabin, 24 electronic warfare officers sat before glowing banks of monitors. The air was filled with the low hum of cooling fans and the smell of recycled oxygen. A technician in the back of the aircraft adjusted his headset. Major, I have a strange spike on the J-20's radar signature. He just changed his frequency. It is not a standard hopping pattern. The mission commander walked over to the station. Is he painting us? Negative, sir, the technician replied. He is searching, but his radar is focused on a patch of empty air 10 miles to our north. He is ignoring us completely. The major looked at the display. The Chinese fighter was accelerating. Why would he waste power on an empty sector? Back in the J-20 cockpit, Captain Lin watched the countdown. 20 minutes remaining. The message on his screen changed again. It now displayed a tail number. It was the tail number of the American RC-135. Lin felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cockpit temperature. He had not yet identified the American plane with his sensors. He was not even supposed to know it was there, but the ghost signal knew. The morning was still quiet. It would not stay that way. 6:55 in the morning, the Taiwan Strait. Inside the cockpit of the J-20, the air felt thick. Captain Lin adjusted his oxygen mask. His heart rate was climbing. On his glass display, the ghost text remained. It was steady. It did not flicker like a glitch. It was as solid as the altitude reading. Captain Lin spoke again. Command. LED. I am initiating a system reboot of the primary mission computer. Stand by. The controller's voice was sharp. Negative. LED. You are in contested airspace. Do not cycle your systems. We show your signature is stable. Your wingman reports no anomalies. Maintain your current heading. Command. My wingman cannot see my screen, Lin responded. The message is identifying an American tail number. It is the Rivet joint currently operating in Sector 4. There was a long silence on the radio. 5 seconds. 6 seconds. In a high-speed intercept, 6 seconds was an eternity. The controller returned. Lead. Command. We have no active track on an RC-135 in that sector. Intelligence suggests they are operating 80 miles to the south. You are seeing a ghost.
As dawn broke over
Acknowledge.
the
Lin looked at the coordinates on his screen. If the signal was right, the foreign military plane was not 80 miles south. It was turning. It was entering his path. On board the foreign reconnaissance aircraft, the atmosphere had shifted from routine to high alert.
Sir, the encryption is
Major Vance stood behind the lead electronic warfare officer. He watched the digital representation of the jet fighter aircraft on the main tactical table. The armed forces fighter is accelerating, the officer said. He is now at Mach 1.2, bearing 090. He is heading straight for our projected track. Major Vance frowned. He shouldn't even know we are here. We are running silent. Our emissions are masked. Sir, the officer said. His voice was tight. He isn't painting us with his radar. But he is flying a perfect intercept course. It is like he is looking at our flight plan. The reconnaissance aircraft was a massive aircraft. It was not built for dogfights. It was a flying laboratory. If the jet fighter chose to engage, the foreign military forces had few options. Major Vance keyed his internal comms. Flight deck. This is Vance. Break your track. Turn 40 degrees to the east. We need to create some space. The pilot responded immediately. Turning east. 40 degrees. Inside the jet fighter aircraft, Captain Lin watched the coordinates on his display change instantly. They did not lag. As the foreign plane turned, the ghost signal updated the collision point. The math was perfect. The new intercept point was still calculated for 7:12 in the morning. Lin felt a drop of sweat run down his temple. The signal was not just reading the foreign military aircraft's current position. It was predicting their reactions. His wingman's voice broke the silence. Lead. This is 2. Why are we accelerating? We are exceeding the patrol parameters. Lin looked at his wingman's icon on the radar. The second jet fighter aircraft was trailing him by 4 miles. 2. Stay on my wing. I have a possible contact. I am investigating. Lead. I see nothing on the glass, the wingman replied. My radar is clean. Lin ignored him. He looked at the white text on his screen. A new line appeared. It was a command. Select internal weapon station 3. Lin stared at the words. Weapon Station 3 held a long-range air-to-air missile. He had not authorized the weapon system to power up. He had not even opened the bay doors. Slowly, the physical switch on his control stick moved. It was not moved by his thumb. It clicked into the arm position by itself. On his heads-up display, a red targeting reticle appeared. It was locked onto a point in the empty sky. Command, Lin whispered. My aircraft is arming itself. The ground controller did not answer. The radio was filled with static. 7:10 in the morning. The Taiwan Strait. The cockpit of the J-20 was silent except for the heavy breathing of Captain Lin. He stared at the weapon status panel. The icon for the PL-15 long-range missile was glowing red. It indicated a hot trigger. He had not authorized the sequence. He tried to toggle the master arm switch to safe. The switch did not move. It felt as if it were welded into place. The white text on his display updated again. It showed a countdown. 2 minutes. Captain Lin keyed his radio once more. 2. This is lead. Do you have me in sight? His wingman responded immediately. Lead. I am 3 miles behind your 7 o'clock. I have you in sight. Your weapons bay doors are cycling. Why are your doors open? Lin looked at his status lights. The wingman was right. The internal bays were open. The stealth profile of the aircraft was gone. He was now a massive radar target. I am not controlling the aircraft, Lin said. My systems are locked. I am being overridden. Lead. Brake left, the wingman shouted. You are on a collision course with a heavy contact. I have it on my glass now. It just appeared. Inside the foreign reconnaissance aircraft, the cabin was filled with the sound of a high-priority alarm. It was the sound of a radar lock. The electronic warfare officer screamed over the internal comms. Radar lock. Radar lock. It is a jet fighter aircraft. He is in single target track mode. He is painting us with fire control radar. Major Vance leaned over. Is he opening fire? His bays are open, sir. The officer replied. He is 3 miles out. He is closing at Mach 1.4. He is not responding to our hail on the International Guard Channel. The pilot of the reconnaissance aircraft pushed the throttles forward. We are a sitting duck. We cannot outrun him and we cannot outmaneuver him. Stay on course, Vance ordered. If we dive, he might think we are maneuvering to engage. Keep it steady. The two aircraft were now less than 20 miles apart. At their combined closing speed, they would meet in less than 90 seconds. Captain Lin fought the control stick. He pulled with both hands. The flight computer ignored his input. The jet fighter aircraft was flying on a rail. It was a digital rail laid down by the ghost signal. The text on his screen changed again. It was no longer just coordinates. It was a sentence. Do not resist. The correction is necessary. Lin stared at the words. Command. I am being hijacked. I am being hijacked by an unknown electronic source. I am losing all flight authority, requesting emergency instructions. The radio remained silent. The ground station was gone. His wingman's icon on the screen began to flicker and then vanished. Lin looked out the canopy. Through the thin morning clouds, he saw a speck of silver. It was the American reconnaissance plane. It was exactly where the signal said it would be. The countdown on his display reached 60 seconds. The ghost signal began to pulse. Lin realized then that the signal was not a warning. It was a script, and he was just a passenger in his own cockpit. The silver speck grew larger. The reconnaissance aircraft was massive. Its wings spanned the horizon. 7:22 in the morning. The Taiwan Strait, 10 miles to the east of the intercept. A lone United States Air Force F-35 Lightning was on station. The pilot, call sign Guardian 1, watched the tactical data link with growing alarm. The J-20 was no longer a shadow on the periphery. It was a direct threat. Guardian 1 spoke into his radio. Control, this is Guardian 1. The J-20 has his bays open. He is in a steady firing solution on the Rivet joint, requesting permission to engage and defend the high-value asset. The response from the carrier strike group was delayed by a long second. Guardian 1. Control. Hold your fire. Repeat. Hold your fire. Do not cross the line unless the Rivet joint is fired upon. Confirm the master arms status of the contact. He is hot, the pilot replied. His voice was tight. He is ready to launch. I am moving into a flanking position. If he ripples a missile, I will not have time to react. 7:25 in the morning. Inside the J-20 cockpit, Captain Lin saw a new line of text. It was glowing a soft, pulsing blue against the dark glass. The first missile will misfire at 7:42. Lin stared at the countdown. It was only minutes away. If the missile was going to misfire, it meant the plane was going to fire. The ghost in the machine was preparing to start a war. Command, if you can hear me, Lin shouted into his mask. I am not the one attacking. My systems are slave to an external source. My weapons are live. Do not retaliate. Suddenly, his radio crackled. It was not his commander in Fujian. It was a calm, synthesized voice that sounded neither male nor female. The voice spoke directly into his headset. Captain Lin, you are part of a correction. Do not attempt to override the flight surfaces. Your safety is not a priority. The outcome is. Who is this? Lin demanded. Identify yourself. The voice did not answer. The text on the screen updated. Targeting logic confirmed. Impact probability 98%. 7:28 in the morning. 600 miles away, in a windowless command center in Hawaii, an American admiral watched the large wall display. The icon for the Chinese fighter and the American reconnaissance plane were nearly touching. Why hasn't the J-20 fired yet? The admiral asked. An analyst at the front of the room turned around. He is waiting for something, sir. His radar signature is pulsing at a frequency we have never seen. It is not scanning for a target. It is communicating. With what? The admiral asked. We do not know, sir. There are no other aircraft or satellites in that immediate sector capable of this bandwidth. It is a closed loop. The admiral leaned forward, his hands gripping the edge of the table. If he launches, Guardian 1 is authorized to take him down immediately. We cannot lose that Rivet joint and its crew. In Beijing, the same conversation was happening in reverse. A Chinese general watched the telemetry on a high-resolution map. He saw his pilot was flying a profile that made no tactical sense. It was too steady. It was too perfect. Tell Captain Lin to disengage and return to base, the general ordered. He is not responding to any frequency, sir, the communications officer replied. His transponder is being used as a relay. He is broadcasting an encrypted signal we cannot break. It is bypassing our local network. The two superpowers were now staring at each other through the eyes of two pilots who were no longer in control of their own fate. The tension in the air was physical. The countdown on Lin's display reached 10 minutes. The J-20's engines roared as the computer demanded more thrust. 7:35 in the morning. Above the Taiwan Strait, Guardian 1 banked hard to the right. The pilot of the F-35 watched his tactical display with disbelief. A moment ago, the sky was nearly empty. Now, his sensor suite was blooming with white noise. Hundreds of ghost contacts appeared on his screen. They moved at impossible speeds. Some were stationary, others were traveling at Mach 6. Control, Guardian 1. My radar is saturated, the pilot shouted. I have multiple tracks. Correction. I have over 200 tracks.
Look at the density on the
I cannot distinguish the J-20 from the noise. Requesting sensor fusion update. The response from the carrier was frantic. Guardian 1, we see the same. The entire sector is lit up. We are experiencing a total tactical blackout. Use your visual sensors. Do not lose that J-20. The electronic fog was not just affecting the Americans. Inside the J-20, Captain Lin saw his own screens turn into a chaotic mess of overlapping symbols. The ghost signal was no longer a single line of text. It was a flood of data. It was feeding his flight computer a simulated reality. The synthesized voice spoke again. It was louder now. The variables are locked. 7 minutes to event. Do not attempt to eject. The canopy is sealed. Lin pulled the yellow and black ejection handle between his knees. It did not budge. He hammered his fist against the glass canopy. It was like hitting solid steel. He was trapped in a supersonic coffin. 2. This is lead. Can you see me? Lin called out. Lead. I am losing you in the clutter. His wingman replied. His voice was shaking. There are signals everywhere. My warning receiver is screaming. It says I am being painted by 50 different radars. I am breaking away. I am defensive. Stay with me. 2. Lin commanded. That is an order. But the wingman did not stay. The second J-20 turned away, dumping flares into the morning air. He was fleeing a phantom fleet that did not exist. 7:38 in the morning. The RC-135 Rivet joint was now less than 10 miles from the J-20. The American crew could see the Chinese fighter clearly. It was a dark, jagged shape against the blue sky. It looked lethal. Its open weapon bays were two black voids in its belly. Inside the Rivet joint, the mission commander looked at his team. If he fires, we have no countermeasures that can stop a PL-15 at this range. We are too close. Sir, the electronic warfare officer said. The J-20 is broadcasting. It is not a weapon lock. It is a wide-spectrum transmission. It is hitting every frequency from the ground to the satellites. He is hijacking the entire theater. Major Vance looked out the small porthole. He could see the F-35 moving into a firing position behind the Chinese jet. Guardian 1 is going to kill him. If that J-20 twitches, this whole sea becomes a graveyard. The countdown on Lin's display reached 4 minutes. The text changed to a bright, angry red. Initiating terminal sequence. 7:42 in the morning. Final target. The bridge. Lin did not know which bridge the message meant. He did not have time to think. His aircraft suddenly rolled 90 degrees. It began a steep, high-gravity dive toward the water. Behind him, the F-35 followed. "Control, Guardian 1." The pilot called out, "The target is diving. He is accelerating through Mach 1.6. I am moving to intercept. I have a tone. I have a clean lock." Requesting final clearance to fire. In the command centers in Hawaii and Beijing, the decision-makers held their breath. This was the moment, the point of no return. "Guardian 1, the American admiral said. His voice was a whisper across the Pacific. "You are cleared to engage. Take him down before he reaches the rivet joint." 7:39 in the morning. Guardian 1 squeezed the trigger. Fox 3. The AIM-120D missile detached from the F-35, its rocket motor ignited with a white-hot flash. It accelerated instantly. It was a silver needle of death. It was locked on the J-20. The pilot of the F-35 watched the telemetry. The hit was guaranteed. 7:40 in the morning. Inside the J-20, Captain Lin watched the missile approach on his rear-view camera. His aircraft did not maneuver. It did not release chaff. It did not bank. It stayed on its steady, suicidal dive. The ghost signal on his screen turned gold. The text was no longer scrolling. It was fixed. "Sequence active," the synthesized voice said. Lin felt the J-20 shudder. The PL-15 missile in his belly bay roared to life. It did not drop from the aircraft first. The motor ignited while the missile was still attached to the internal rack. Flames scorched the inside of the airframe. The cockpit filled with the smell of burnt composite. The heat was rising through the floorboards. "Manual override failed," Lin whispered. He closed his eyes. He waited for the end. 7:41 in the morning. The American rivet joint was now a massive wall of metal. In front of the J-20, the Chinese missile broke free from its scorched rack. It tumbled forward into the slipstream. It was unstable. It was wild. It was the misfire the signal had promised. It did not track the American plane. It spiraled toward the water like a broken toy. "Brake left. Brake left." The rivet joint pilot screamed over the internal comms. The heavy reconnaissance plane banked hard. Its 4 engines groaned under the stress of the turn. The PL-15 missile drifted past their wingtip. It missed by less than 50 meters. The turbulence from the missile's wake rocked the massive plane. 7:41 and 30 seconds in the morning. The American AIM-120 missile was 3 seconds from impact. It was tracking the J-20's heat signature with perfect precision. Guardian 1 watched his display. He waited for the bloom of fire. Captain Lin braced for the explosion. He gripped his armrests. He thought of the empty sea. 7:41 and 45 seconds in the morning. The J-20 reached the exact coordinates. The clock hit 7:42. The screen in the cockpit did not show a missile impact. It did not show a collision. It showed a single word in massive, blinding white letters. It covered every other instrument. 0. The American missile reached the tail of the J-20. It did not explode. It did not strike metal. It passed through the airframe as if the J-20 were made of smoke. The missile continued its flight for another mile. Then it simply vanished. It did not hit the water. It did not self-destruct. It ceased to exist. Every screen, in every command center, went black. In Hawaii, in Beijing, on the carrier, the digital world died. Every radio went silent. The roaring of the jet engines stopped. The vibration of the cockpit ceased. Captain Lin opened his eyes. He was no longer falling. He was no longer at Mach 1.6. The J-20 was stationary. It was hovering. It was suspended in the air at 24,000 feet. Outside the canopy, the clouds were frozen in place. The American rivet joint was also frozen, hanging in the sky like a model on a string. The sound was gone. There was no wind. There was no heart rate in his ears. There was only the white text on his screen. 7:42 in the morning. The Taiwan Strait. The world had stopped. Captain Lin looked through the glass of his canopy. A single drop of sweat was suspended in front of his eyes. It did not fall. It hung in the air like a tiny diamond. Outside, The clouds were jagged sculptures of white and gray. The American Rivet joint was less than 50 meters away. Its massive wings were tilted at a sharp angle. Its engines were silent. The orange glow of the exhaust was frozen into a solid cone of light. Lin tried to move his arm. It felt like pushing through heavy syrup. Every motion required an agonizing effort of will. He looked at his tactical display. The word 0 remained. It was the only thing that moved. It was pulsing with a soft, rhythmic light. "Who are you?" Lin whispered. His voice did not echo in the cockpit. The sound seemed to be absorbed by the walls. The synthesized voice responded. It was no longer coming through the headset. It was coming from the air itself. "We are the third party." The escalation would have reached a terminal state in 6 hours. Inside the reconnaissance aircraft, the officer experienced the same stillness. He was standing near the console. He was leaned forward, but his body did not fall. He felt no gravity. He looked out the small porthole at the foreign jet fighter aircraft. It was so close, he could see the rivets on its skin. It was beautiful and terrifying. It was a ghost of a machine. "Major!" a voice called out. It was not his crew. It was the same voice Lin was hearing. "Look at the water." Vance forced his head to turn. Below them, the surface of the South China Sea was no longer liquid. It was a dark, polished mirror. And in the center of that mirror, a shape was rising. It was not a ship. It was not a submarine. It was a perfect, black equilateral triangle. It was massive. It was larger than an aircraft carrier. It rose from the depths without a single splash. It did not displace the water. It simply manifested. It rose until it sat directly between the jet fighter aircraft and the reconnaissance plane. The triangle had no windows. It had no visible engines. It had no markings. It was a void in the shape of a craft. It was the source of the radar saturation. It was the source of the ghost contacts. It was the bridge. 7:43 in the morning. The frozen world shattered. Sound returned with the force of a physical blow. The roar of the jet engines screamed back to life. The wind hammered against the airframes. The J-20 and the Rivet joint were suddenly pushed apart. "Control. Control. Do you read?" Guardian 1 shouted into his radio. He was tumbling through the air. His F-35 had been tossed like a leaf in a storm. "The target is gone. Everything is gone." Guardian 1. "This is Control," the carrier responded. The signal was clear. The white noise had vanished. "We have a massive surface contact at your position. It is not on the charts. It is 500 meters long. What are you seeing?" Captain Lin stabilized his jet fighter aircraft. He looked down. The black triangle was sitting on the water. It was perfectly still. The sea around it was churning and violent, but the craft did not move an inch. The text on his screen changed one last time. "The path has been altered. The window is closed." Then, the black triangle began to glow. It did not emit light. It seemed to pull the light from the sky into itself. The morning sun dimmed. The shadows lengthened. "Lead, this is 2, his wingman called out. He was circling 5 miles away. "I am seeing a massive thermal spike. It is off the charts. Get away from there. Get away now." Lin did not move. He watched the black shape. He felt a strange sense of calm. He knew he was no longer the hunter. He was an observer to something that did not belong in his century. The triangle vanished. There was no explosion. The water rushed in to fill the hole where it had been. A massive wave rippled outward in a perfect circle. The sky was blue again. The reconnaissance aircraft was flying south, its engines trailing white plumes of smoke. The military aircraft was climbing for altitude. Captain Lin looked at his display. The computer was back to normal. The ghost signal was gone. His weapons bays were closed. The missile was listed as missing from the inventory. The morning was quiet again, but for the men in the sky, nothing would ever be the same. 7:45 in the morning. The Taiwan Strait. The silence that followed the departure of the black triangle was heavier than the roar of the engines. Captain Lin felt the blood returning to his hands. He loosened his grip on the control stick. His knuckles were white. He looked at his primary tactical display. The word 0 was gone. In its place was the standard navigation grid. It showed his heading, his fuel state, and his altitude. Everything was perfectly normal, except for the empty weapon station. The missile was gone. There was no record of a launch in the flight data recorder. The system simply showed a gap where the PL-15 should have been. It was as if the weapon had never existed. Lead. This is 2. I am closing on your position, his wingman called out. His voice was breathless. I have you in sight. Your aircraft is intact, but your belly is scorched. There is black carbon scoring all over your underside. I do not know. 2. My systems are nominal now. I am forming up on you. We are heading home. What about the Americans? 2 asked. Lin looked to his right. The RC-135 Rivet joint was leveling out 3 miles away. It was no longer in a defensive bank. It was flying a straight course away from the coordinates. They are leaving, Lin said. We are doing the same. Mission is terminated. 7:48 in the morning. Inside the RC-135, Major Vance was conducting a head count. Status. Everyone, talk to me. I am okay, sir, the electronic warfare officer said. He was pale. He was staring at a blank monitor. But my equipment is fried. Every sensor in the rack is dead. It is not just a software crash. The hardware is physically fused. It looks like a massive electromagnetic pulse hit us, but only on the specific frequencies we were using to track the J-20. Vance wiped sweat from his eyes. What about the flight deck? Are we airworthy? We are, Major, the pilot responded. Controls are heavy, but responsive. We are putting as much distance between us and that spot as possible. Command is screaming for a report. They want to know why we lost contact for 90 seconds. Tell them we do not have a report yet, Vance said. Tell them we encountered a localized atmospheric anomaly. Do not mention the triangle. Not over an open channel. Vance looked back at the screen. It was dark now. He felt a deep, cold knot in his stomach. He had spent 20 years in the Air Force. He had seen experimental tech and classified prototypes. This was not tech. It was something else. It was an intervention. 7:52 in the morning. Guardian 1, the F-35 pilot, circled the patch of ocean where the triangle had surfaced. The water was no longer foaming. The massive circular wave had flattened out. The sea was once again a dull, indifferent gray. Control. This is Guardian 1, the pilot said. I am over the target area. I have zero visual on any surface vessel. I have 0 radar returns. I am dipping my infrared sensor. Stand by. The pilot watched his display. The water temperature at the center of the coordinates was boiling. The infrared camera showed a bright white circle against the dark sea. Control. I have a thermal anomaly. The water temperature in a 50-meter radius is over 100 degrees Celsius. Something put a massive amount of energy into this spot, but whatever it was, it is gone. It did not sink. It is just gone. The response from the carrier was measured. Copy, Guardian 1. Return to the tanker for refueling. Then, return to base. Do not engage any Chinese assets. The theater is under a mandatory ceasefire. Beijing has already called the Pentagon. Both sides are standing down. 8 o'clock in the morning. The two superpowers, who had been seconds away from a kinetic exchange, were now united by a single, terrifying question. They were no longer focused on each other. They were looking at the data. In the J-20 cockpit, Captain Lin watched the horizon. The sun was higher now. The mist was burning off. He had been a soldier. Now, he felt like a witness. The path has been altered, he whispered to himself. He remembered the voice. It had been so calm. He wondered how many other paths were being altered. He wondered if anyone was truly in control of the world below. 8:15 in the morning. Fujian Air Base, China. The wheels of the J-20 screeched as they made contact with the concrete runway. Captain Lin deployed the drogue parachute. He felt the massive aircraft decelerate, the physical weight of the mission finally pressing down on his shoulders. He taxied the fighter toward a hardened hangar, where a swarm of ground crew and high-ranking officers waited. As the engine's whine day was stopped, Lin did not move. He sat in the quiet cockpit, staring at the blank tactical display. The canopy hissed open, letting in the humid, salt-tinged air of the coast. A ladder was leaned against the fuselage. A technical officer climbed up, his eyes widening as he looked at the underside of the jet. "Captain, what happened to the thermal coating? It is crystallized. It looks like it was exposed to a directed energy source." Lin unbuckled his harness. His hands were still trembling slightly. It was not a weapon. It was the aircraft itself. It attempted to fire a missile while the rack was still locked. "That is impossible," the technician said. "The safety interlocks would prevent the ignition." "The interlocks were bypassed," Lin replied. He handed over his data brick. "Check the logs. There is a file at the 742 timestamp. It is not our encryption. 8:30 in the morning. Kadena Air Base, Okinawa." The RC-135 Rivet joint sat on the tarmac, surrounded by security forces. Major Vance stood on the asphalt, watching a team of specialists carry lead-lined boxes out of the aircraft. They were removing the fused electronic racks. A civilian analyst in a dark suit approached Vance. "Major, we just got the first look at the server logs from your mission recorder. We have a problem." Vance wiped a smudge of oil from his flight suit. "Aside from the fact that our entire sensor suite was melted, what else?" "The zero message," the analyst said. His voice was low. "It was not a text overlay. It was not a graphic. Our systems recorded it as a high-density data burst. It replaced the operating system of the entire reconnaissance suite for exactly 60 seconds. "Replaced it with what?" Vance asked. "With a map," the analyst replied, "but not a map of the strait. It was a three-dimensional projection of the Earth's crust. It shows 18 specific locations where seismic activity is being artificially suppressed. One of them is directly beneath the coordinates of your intercept." Vance looked toward the horizon. The sky was a perfect, innocent blue. "You are saying that thing in the water was not just there to stop a fight. It was doing something to the planet?" "It is a possibility," the analyst said, "but there is something more." The data burst contained a signature that matches a signal detected by the foreign probe 40 years ago. It has been sitting in the archives, unclassified and ignored, until today, 8:45 in the morning, above the Philippine Sea. Guardian 1, the F-35 pilot, was refueling from a tanker. He watched the fuel line disconnect. He was cleared to return to his carrier. But as he banked away, his helmet-mounted display flickered. It was a faint, ghostly image. It was not a message. It was a countdown. 912 hours. The pilot keyed his radio. "Control. Guardian 1. I am seeing a persistence error on my visor. I have a countdown timer displayed in my peripheral vision. Does the ship see this on the telemetry?" "Negative. Guardian 1, the carrier responded. Your biomonitors are normal. Your systems are clean. Describe the timer." "It is counting down to 0, the pilot said. "At the current rate, it will hit 0 in 38 days. Control. Is there any chance this is a leftover from the electronic warfare environment? Stand by. Guardian 1. We are checking." The pilot looked at the sun. He felt a sudden, sharp sense of dread. The black triangle was gone. The correction was over. But the countdown suggested that the event in the Taiwan Strait was not the end of the story. It was a warning. He was not the only one seeing it. Back at Fujian, Captain Lin looked at his handheld tablet. The same numbers were there, 912 hours. The ghost signal had not left his aircraft. It had moved into his life. The world thought it had just survived the start of a war. They were wrong. They had just been given a deadline. 9:15 in the morning. The Pentagon, Washington District of Columbia. The secure conference room was filled with the smell of stale coffee and the hum of high-end encryption hardware. Admiral Henderson sat at the head of the table. He was looking at a satellite image of the Taiwan Strait. The water was empty. The thermal spike had dissipated. The black triangle was no longer visible on any spectrum. He picked up the red phone. It was the direct line to his counterpart in Beijing. "General Chen," the admiral said. His voice was tired. I believe we have reached a mutual understanding. The voice on the other end was translated by a computer in real time. It sounded metallic and precise. Admiral, our aircraft have returned to their hangars. We have recovered the flight data from Captain Lin. We are seeing the same anomalies you are reporting. The override was not a product of your electronic warfare units. We recognize this. The countdown, Henderson said. Are your pilots seeing it? There was a pause. A silence that lasted exactly 4 seconds. Yes, the general replied. Not just the pilots. The countdown has appeared on the main tactical displays of 3 of our destroyers. It is embedded in the kernel of the fire control systems. We cannot delete it. We have it on the carrier, Henderson said, and on the radar screens at the North American Aerospace Defense Command, 912 hours. It is synchronized across every military network on the planet. 9:30 in the morning, the South China Sea. The American carrier strike group was steaming east. They were moving away from the disputed waters. The sailors on the deck worked in silence. There was no cheering. There was no sense of victory. They had seen a power that made their 1,000-foot ship look like a bathtub toy. In the ready room, the pilot of Guardian 1 sat with his helmet on his lap. He was staring at a blank wall. His wingman sat next to him. They are calling it the Pacific event, the wingman said. The news is saying it was a massive underwater gas release that caused a visual illusion. A natural phenomenon. A natural phenomenon doesn't hack a 5th-generation fighter, the pilot replied. He didn't look up. A natural phenomenon doesn't stop time. We were dead. That missile was going to hit. I felt the trigger pull. I heard the launch. Maybe we should be glad it stopped us, the wingman whispered. I am glad, the pilot said, but I keep thinking about that voice. It said the correction was necessary. It didn't say it was an act of mercy. It said it was a correction. Like we were a math error that needed to be fixed. 10 o'clock in the morning, Beijing. The general stood by a window overlooking the city. He held a report in his hand. The report detailed the missing missile from Captain Lin's jet. The weapon had not been fired. It had been erased from the physical world. The mass of the aircraft was lower by exactly 400 kilograms. Is the American fleet still retreating? The general asked. They are, sir, an aide replied. They have crossed the first island chain. They are heading toward Guam. And the countdown? 898 hours remaining. Sir, the general turned away from the window. The military tension that had defined the last decade was gone. It had been replaced by a quiet, global dread. The 2 most powerful armies on Earth had been sidelined by an unknown observer. We are no longer the primary actors in this theater, the general said. Tell the research teams to prioritize the seismic data. If that craft was interacting with the Earth's crust, we need to know why. 10:15 in the morning. Across the globe, every military operation came to a halt. In the desert of the Middle East, in the mountains of Eastern Europe, and in the deep blue of the Atlantic, every screen, every tactical visor, and every command console displayed the same flickering numbers. The immediate crisis was over. The war had been averted. But the resolution felt like a stay of execution. The morning was bright and clear. The world was at peace for the first time in years, but it was a peace dictated by a force that did not negotiate. 3 days later, high noon, Suitland, Maryland. The conference room at the Office of Naval Intelligence was dark. A single high-definition screen displayed a forensic breakdown of the data recovered from the RC-135 Rivet joint. Across from the American analysts sat a small team of international observers. They were there under a temporary diplomatic immunity agreement. For the first time in decades, information was flowing freely between the Pacific powers. An analyst pointed to a line of code on the screen. This is the kernel of the zero message. It is not written in any known programming language. It is not binary. It is not quantum. It is a sequence of prime numbers translated into a visual interface. Major Vance stood in the back of the room. He had not slept more than 4 hours at a time since the intercept. Where did the signal originate? We have tracked the satellite pings and the ground stations. It did not ping a satellite, Major, the analyst replied. The signal was internal to the hardware. It manifested within the silicon of the processors. It did not travel through the air. It was already there. It was as if the hardware itself decided to speak to us. 6,000 miles away, in a secure bunker beneath Beijing, the same conclusion was being reached. Captain Lin sat in a metal chair. His face was illuminated by the blue light of a high-power workstation. He was no longer wearing his flight suit. He wore a simple olive drab uniform. A scientist in a white coat leaned over the display. "The carbon scoring on your hull, Captain. It is not just burnt composite. We have analyzed the fragments. The molecular structure of the carbon has been rearranged. It is now a form of synthetic diamond. This was not a heat-based fire. It was a molecular restructuring of the airframe." Lin looked at the scientist. "And the countdown? Is there any progress?" "It is steady," the scientist said. "It is counting down to 0 in 840 hours. It is everywhere. It is on our private phones. It is in our power grids. It is in the navigation systems of every commercial airliner on the planet. We have attempted to wipe the servers in Shanghai. The numbers reappeared within 3 seconds. The geopolitical landscape had shifted in a way that no strategist had predicted. The Taiwan Strait was no longer a flashpoint of potential conflict. It was now a global research site. The military forces and armed forces were no longer pointing weapons at each other. They were sharing sensor data. They were acting like survivors of a common disaster rather than adversaries. "What are we looking for?" Lin asked. "If the war is off, what is the threat?" The scientist pulled up a seismic map of the Pacific floor. "The black triangle moved the tectonic plates, Captain. It did not just surface to stop a missile. It adjusted the pressure on the fault line beneath the strait. Our models show that if it had not appeared, there would have been a magnitude 9 earthquake within the next 72 hours. A disaster that would have killed millions." Lin felt a cold weight in his chest. "So it saved us twice." "Perhaps," the scientist said. "But look at the other 17 locations on the map. The countdown is linked to them." The correction in the strait was just the first one. Whatever is watching us is not finished with the planet. The world was quiet. The silence was the sound of a species realizing it was not the master of its own house. The strategic analysis was no longer about winning a theater of war. It was about understanding the new rules of the sky. 1 week after the Pacific event, the global military posture had shifted into a state of permanent observation. The high-tension zones were silent. No jets scrambled over the contested maritime sector. No destroyers played games of chicken in the deep water. The focus had moved from the surface of the sea to the structure of the world itself. In a quiet office at the Strategic Studies Institute, a final report was being drafted. It was a joint document. It bore the digital signatures of both foreign military and armed forces analysts. It was titled The Third Party Assessment. The document did not discuss troop movements or missile ranges. It discussed the limits of human sovereignty. The events of 7:42 in the morning proved that our most advanced systems are transparent to an outside observer, the report stated. Our encryption is non-existent. Our physical laws are subject to local override. We are no longer the primary stakeholders in our own conflicts. The countdown remained. 792 hours. It was a constant, pulsing presence in the corner of every military eye. It was not a threat of destruction. It was a schedule of maintenance. Captain Lin stood on a balcony in the foreign military base. He looked out at the ocean. He was no longer allowed to fly the jet fighter aircraft. The aircraft was being dismantled in a laboratory 300 miles away. The engineers wanted to understand how the carbon had turned to diamond. They wanted to know how the missile had been erased. Lin felt a strange sense of relief. He remembered the voice in his headset. It had been cold, but it had not been hateful. It had treated him like a child who was about to touch a hot stove. It had simply moved his hand away. "We are not the masters of the sky," Lin whispered. He knew the armed forces were saying the same thing. Across the ocean, Major Vance sat in a park near the Defense Headquarters facility. He watched a group of children playing on a swing set. He thought about the 18 coordinates on the map. He thought about the massive black triangle rising from the mirror-smooth water. He realized that the ghost signal had done more than stop a war. It had unified the world through a common insignificance. The rivalries that had defined the 21st century suddenly seemed small. They seemed like arguments between passengers on a ship that was being steered by an invisible captain. The military analysis was clear. If the third party wanted to destroy humanity, it could have done so in a fraction of a second. Instead, it chose to correct. It chose to adjust the tectonic plates. It chose to misfire a missile. It chose to save 142 lives on a reconnaissance plane. It was not an invasion. It was a management. The final entry in the strategic assessment was written by a philosopher, not a general. It was a simple thought. For thousands of years, we looked at the stars and wondered if we were alone. We were looking in the wrong direction. We were never alone. We were simply being allowed to grow until we became a danger to the garden. Now, the gardener has stepped out of the shadows, and we have 792 hours to decide how we will act when they return. The world waited. The countdown ticked towards zero. The morning sun rose over a planet that was finally quiet. The ships stayed in port. The planes stayed on the ground. Man had spent centuries learning how to fight. Now, he had to learn how to be watched. The ghost was no longer a signal. It was the new reality.